We're in between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, so it means that our eyes and hearts are facing Yom Kippur. What I want to share with you for the bit of time that we have this afternoon is, what is the basic idea that we're supposed to have in mind facing Yom Kippur? I'm going to suggest the following to you. Before I do it, I want to share something that I experience, not so often, but I wonder if you experience the same thing. There have been times where I've been dreaming, and like a sound will happen. Either it's the alarm clock, maybe there's a car, maybe there's some kind of music playing or whatever it is. And I start to incorporate the sound into my dream. Until it gets to be so strange that I wake up and realize that it's an outside sound. I mean, how would I know there's an outside sound until I wake up? But what happens is that I realize when I wake up that what I've been doing is dreaming the sound into my dream. Has it ever happened to you? It's happening? Okay, good. So I'm not, okay. I'm a little crazy, but all right. So the question is, why does that happen? And what does it mean that that happens? And it's important for us to understand that understanding that happening has everything to do with Yom Kippur. It's the way that the human mind works. And that is this. That when I, as a human being, thinking, and it's important to realize that even when we're asleep, we love stories. Human beings love stories. We're addicted to stories. We like stories so much that even when we're sleeping, our mind stays up all night telling us stories. And this is what happens when something occurs that the mind does not know how to explain. It immediately finds an explanation for it. So if you're in the middle of a dream and a sound comes on outside and your brain picks up on that sound, does not know why it's happening, from where it's coming, it will immediately, without consciousness, you're not conscious, you're sleeping, it will immediately create a story around it so that it can stay sleeping. That's what you experience whenever it is that that happens. That means that our minds are programmed to find explanations for the things that we do not understand. Do the explanations need to be true? No. Clearly, from the fact that all of us, many of us, have experienced what I just explained. That we could be sleeping, a sound could be happening, my brain doesn't know what it is, but it figures it out. It creates a story around it. And it will create an elaborate story around it. All of us are wired that way. It does not only happen while we're asleep. It's the way our brains work. Which means that our brain, unfortunately, are illusion generators. They generate illusion constantly. The question is, why do our brains do that? And is it okay? Are we happy with our brains doing that? The truth is, we have very little choice because it's just the way that our brains work. But we have the ability to be conscious of what our brains do. In other words, we can think about what we're thinking about. And we can think about thinking about what we're thinking about. We're the only animals on the planet that can do that. It's called, in technical terms, meta-consciousness. So it's not just that we are conscious, that I know that I am in this room, that you're sharing this room with other people, that there are people standing at the walls over here watching, making sure nobody, gets out of line. There's all of this going on as we're listening, and then there is, if we wish, thinking about the fact that I'm thinking about it. Uniquely human. My brain, when it is running on its own, is more concerned about things it doesn't understand than truth. So another way to say it is, my brain is more concerned about being secure than it is about knowing what's really happening. We care more about security than we do about truth. It's the way we're wired. To explain, the reason why my brain, your brain, will do that when we're sleeping, and will do the same when we're awake without realizing it, we make stories to explain what's going on in our lives when we don't understand what's going on in our life, is because how does it feel to know that I don't know? How does it feel? It's a terribly uneasy feeling when you don't know. What does it mean that you don't know? It means that you're removed. It means that you have no idea what's actually going on. It means that you are vulnerable. What does vulnerable mean? Who can tell me what that means? Sorry? At risk. It means, well done, wow, amazing. At risk. It means that you are in trouble. And we have been in trouble since the dawning of time. Except that trouble was much more serious when we were hunters and gatherers. Because if you didn't know what was going on when you heard a little bit of a sound in the jungle or in the forest or in the field, and it was a predator, it was too late. You couldn't afford to sit and figure out what it was that was going on. You had to always be concerned that it was a problem. And so before you cared about the truth, you cared about being safe. And that's the way that we run today. We are more concerned about being safe than we are about being truthful. Because our brains are not set up for truth. We do not detect a world as it is without a great deal of effort. Because more important for my brain is that it can sleep at night, not that it actually knows what's going on. So if it finds a story that works, that makes me feel better, whether it is true or not, my brain tends to accept the story. My brain, your brain, everyone's. It's the way the human mind works. The good news is that because of meta-consciousness, because I can think about what I'm thinking about, I can think about the fact that maybe what I'm thinking isn't true. But the first thing that I have to do is accept that just because I think doesn't necessarily mean that I think correctly. As a matter of fact, more often than not, if I'm thinking incorrectly. And no, that's not just me. That's everybody. Because let's think about this. How do we know what's going on in the world around us? Do we have any direct connection with the world around us? Absolutely none. There is no direct connection. So if I'm touching a microphone, it's because the nerves in my fingers and hand hopefully are working well. They're sending information to my brain. My brain is taking the information and telling me that I'm holding a microphone. But it's not a direct connection. If my nerves weren't working or my brain wasn't working, it could very well be that I would feel a microphone when there wasn't one, or that I wouldn't feel it when there was one, and so on and so forth. What you see, how your vision works. Do you ever see anything other than light? No. Because your eyes are nothing more than light sensors. That's all they do. So all that you see around you, you hope is there. I hope you're there. I've had crazier dreams. Could be that I'm imagining the entire thing. Could be that you are. But the bottom line is that what you hope is happening is that the light that is bouncing off all of the people sitting around you, and the walls in the room, and me and your chair and so on, is accurate. And that what your mind is interpreting is a real, true interpretation. People hallucinate. And they see things, feel things that aren't there. And it's only because the brain is firing, telling you something's there when it isn't there. But that's all that ever happens, is that your brain fires and tells you what's going on. So I have to constantly think about what I'm thinking about. in order to be able to verify whether what I'm thinking about is indeed true. That is the entirety and the base of Yom Kippur. It's a question of, can you say that you recognize that at a certain point your thinking was flawed? All of us experience flawed thought. All of us experience situations in which we experience a reality, we make a judgment about that reality, and we act on that judgment. We do not always make accurate judgments. More often than not, our judgments are inaccurate because our brains are not wired for truth. They're wired for security and comfort. And if we wish to live in a real world, connected to real things, engaged in a true life, that we have to constantly assess what I'm thinking and whether it's true or not. In Torah, and this is the important perspective that I'm bringing with me today as a rabbi, in Torah, we believe that the more connected to truth that we are, the more connected to God we are. Because He's the source of all things. It's what we mean when we say, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. That there is one source to all things. And that means that all that exists has its source in one source of existence. What is because that source allows it to be. So I have two options as a human being. I can live in the reality of my mind, and I can project that reality out onto the world and see everything around me as I wish to see it. Or I can see the world, feel the world, experience the world, and test it to make sure that what I'm seeing and experiencing is really what's going on out there. That's not easy. It takes a great deal of effort. Albert Einstein said, a person should always look for what is, and not for what one wishes it to be. And that's what he was referring to. He was saying, test. Don't simply rely on your first thought, because your first thought is in here and doesn't necessarily reflect what's out there. It happens in your dreams. Strange noises come around, you make stories for it. We make stories all the time. We make stories without even thinking about the fact that we're making the stories. We can do it in our sleep, we do it while we're awake, we don't even think about it. That means that if a person is interested in living a realistic life, in living a true life, in living a life that is based in honesty and reality, one has to know that one's mind is an illusion generator. And we have to question our illusions all the time. So in Torah, our people, the Jewish people, have cared about truth for 3,000 years. We have cared very much about whether we were living a life that was embedded in truth or a life that was living only in terms of our own minds. We were not the only people, but as a nation, we were the earliest to self-examine. What does it mean to self-examine? To examine oneself. Right? If you were to close your eye, you don't have to, but if you want to, if you were to close your eyes, you could imagine yourself floating at the ceiling of this room, looking down at yourself, looking down at others. That too is a uniquely human trait. To be able to look at yourself from the outside. To examine yourself, examine your life. To wonder whether the life that I am living is embedded in truth and reality, or it lives only in terms of my own head. Yom Kippur for our people for 3,000 years has been a day in which we come to terms with whether we're living in our head or there's a reality that we have to face. I'm going to show you how. We open Yom Kippur with something that is relatively new in Jewish history. Remember, if we're talking about 3,000 years, 500 years, it's yesterday. It's called Kol Nidre. You've heard of it? Very new. And what is it? What do we do with this? The first thing that we do on Yom Kippur night is to say, anything that I have locked myself into because of my thinking that was flawed, I should have the door opened. In other words, whatever it is that I've said about my life, I've said about the reality of my life, I have closed myself in because of the way that I think that was flawed, that wasn't true. I'm opening a door and stepping out of it so that I can begin to address the truth and reality of my life because I care about my life. Because I realize that the only way for me to live a real, honest, true life is to have it living in reality and not in the figments of my imagination. That's the first thing that we do. The second thing that we do on Yom Kippur, and this happens every single prayer. It is the centerpiece of every single prayer. We have 5 of them over Yom Kippur. It's very long service. 5 of them. And in each and every single one of them, we have one centerpiece that we call vidui. Vidui is simply saying, I know that I missed the mark on this particular issue. Why do I say I missed the mark? What's the Hebrew word for missing the mark? Does anybody know? Sorry? That was a funny one. Chet. The word for missing the mark in Hebrew is chet. So we will say over and over again on Yom Kippur, Al chet shechatati. On the fact that I missed the mark. And we see that word used in the Nevi'im, in the prophets. Where do we see it? One of the most interesting places is with the tribe of Benjamin, tribe of Binyamin. They were expert marksmen. They were trained from the time that they were young to be expert snipers. And it explains how accurate their aim was in this way. It says, Kol echad, every single one of the snipers from the tribe of Benjamin, Haya kolea el asara, they could aim at a hair on a person's head. Ve'enon machati, and they didn't veer. Machati is the same word as chet. They didn't miss the mark. So the word chet means I missed the mark. And the question is, in my life, when I miss a mark, because I miscalculated, I thought that the bullseye was over there. I handled it as though the bullseye was there. I shot and calibrated, intending to hit it, and I missed it. Which means something was off. I misstepped. How do I relate to that? Do I paint a bullseye around the arrow, wherever it is that it ended up, and say I made it? Or do I realize, yeah, I missed the mark on that one. We're going to have to try again. If I'm interested in truth and reality, I say, yeah, I missed the mark. If I'm interested in security, that I shouldn't feel bad, uneasy, uncomfortable, I paint a bullseye around the arrow and say I made it. How do I live my life? So on Yom Kippur, what we do as a people, and it is your choice and my choice to use that day, if we wish to be able to come up and say, I'm not going to pretend today that I made it when I didn't, that I was right when I was wrong, that I was in the right when I should have done something otherwise. I don't know what I'm going to do to fix it yet, but I'm not going to say, something that isn't true today. I'm going to admit that I missed. And it's important to think about why it's valuable to do that. Why is it valuable to acknowledge one's own insanity? Because it's really what it is. I mean, all of us have a level of insanity, don't we? Some of us more than others. I mean, what is insanity if it's not simply miscalculating reality? Thinking that something is true when it isn't. So there are very severe levels of insanity and where people really have no idea what's going on. And there are very minor levels of insanity where people kind of are off about what's going on. The funny thing is that when it comes to us knowing ourselves, whether we're in a situation of sanity or not, it's pretty difficult. Because we always think that we're right on, in truth. It's much easier for us to get it when we see other people, right? We can always tell when other people are missing it. It's easy for us to see. For us, it's not as easy. So it's important for us to kind of acknowledge our own insanity wherever it is that it happens. The reason for that is, when you know that you're crazy, it helps you deal with your craziness. So think about this, for example. The funny thing is that even if another person was crazy, and you had to interact with them, but they knew that they were insane, you feel better about them than if they didn't. I mean, imagine the following example. There's an interesting psychological syndrome called Jerusalem syndrome. You know what this is? It's a crazy thing. It's a real syndrome. It happens to people who live in Jerusalem most of their life. Jerusalem syndrome is where a person living in Jerusalem believes that they're the Mashiach. They're the Messiah. And they go around thinking they're the Mashiach. So imagine the following two scenarios. One person comes up to you, you're walking around in Yerushalayim, you're walking around in Jerusalem, and a person comes up to you and says, "Excuse me, can I have a word with you?" "Yeah. I want you to know I'm the Mashiach. And I have some great stuff to tell you." What do you do in that situation? You tiptoe away from the person and start running in the other direction, usually. Unless you're really interested in having one of those conversations. But what if a person comes to you and says to you, "I'd like to have a talk with you if you don't mind. I've got a problem. I think that I'm the Mashiach, but I know that I'm crazy. It can't be, but every time I get up in the morning, I think I'm the Mashiach. Do you have the number of a good psychiatrist?" And you say, "Of course I have a number of a good psychiatrists." Very different scenario. Which one is more threatening? Usually, the first one is more threatening. Because there's no sense that they have no clue as to what's going on. But a person who realizes, look, I can't have control of my mind, but I know that there's something wrong with the way that I'm thinking, a very different scenario. It's much more open. That is what we do on Yom Kippur with God. We come to God on Yom Kippur and we say, "Listen, Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the universe, I know that my brain plays tricks often. I know that just because I think doesn't mean that I think correctly. I know that sometimes I do things based on my thinking, and I find out only later on that what I did was based on flawed thinking. Today I'm saying to you that I'm not going to pretend that I didn't do it. I'm not going to pretend that I didn't think it. I'm not going to pretend that my brain is always functioning perfectly. I'm going to acknowledge the places in where I wasn't thinking correctly." And that is a huge thing to do as a human being. Because it means one thing, and this is the most important thing. We are committed to living truth. We are committed to living reality. To as much as we can. And that's why Yom Kippur comes every year. Because every single year that we live, there's more that we become aware of. And so what are the things that we have to do in order to be able to prepare for this? If we care, what are the things that we have to do? What helps us discover the nature of our own thought? If all I've got is my own thinking, then I've got a problem. You know why? Because if I start thinking about my thinking with the thing that I used to think with, and it's already a mess, how do I ever get out of that? Follow what I'm saying? If the tools for thought that I use to think with are already flawed, how do I use that in order to be able to think about what it is that I'm thinking about if the thinking that it does in the first place is a mess? What do I need? What do I need? Other people. I need other people that have been thinking. Other people that I trust to care about truth. And say to that person or those people, tell me, I've been thinking this. What do you think? How open are we to do that? Is it not a vulnerable feeling? Do we not feel at risk when we go to somebody and say, listen, this is what I was thinking, what do you think? Do we not immediately open ourselves to criticism, which doesn't feel very nice? But that's the work. And so it's true that the truth doesn't always feel very good. And it's true that living in reality is not always easy. But if you think about the legacy of the Jewish people, to have Yom Kippur as a day in the year for 3,000 years of our history, it changes a people. Because it means that on one day a year, when we show up and we realize it's important, we commit to the fact that truth is more important to us than security. And that's the ultimate question that we have to ask before Yom Kippur. What's more important to you? As a human being that needs to live a life on this earth, what's more important to you? To live in security or to live in truth? To live in the real world or to live in your own mind? It's not an easy question to answer, but it's a question that I encourage you to think about during these days. And if you think about it during these days, it will begin to change your life for the better. Because you will commit yourself to living truth and to living in reality. And that's really the goal of our entire lives. It's why relationships are very important. It's why friends are very important. Because it is the true friend that can be able to tell us, listen, I heard how you're thinking, what it is that you're saying, I don't know if it's going to be good for you. I don't know if it's leading to a place that's going to work for you. And so that becomes the core of what it is that we do during this time. Because although we started simply thinking in terms of security, and although that does happen to us in our dreams, and although our minds are illusion generators, we have the ability to be able to think about what we think about. And to question the nature of its truth. And whether what we're thinking is working. So for us, as a nation, whether our thinking was working or not has been at the center of our lives. We were concerned that whether the world we saw was the world that actually was, always. And so we created systems and situations, and the Torah itself gives us systems in order for us to be able to say, wait a minute, I've got to question my thinking. And I have to know whether what it is that I'm thinking is real or not. Or whether what's going on is what we call projections. And what are projections? Where I might be thinking something and putting it out onto the world and living that way without wondering whether it's actually what's going on or not. So it's a small thing to think about. It's one core idea that runs through all of these 10 days. And it's something that's important for us as human beings to be able to hold with us. So as you go to sleep at night, during these 10 days, think about your day. Think about the assumptions that were made, the interactions that you had, the judgments that were made throughout the day, how you saw the reality. And if you're brave, and you're strong, and you care about truth, question whether it was true and real or not. And if so, how do you know? Are there ways to verify it? Be close with people whose thinking you respect. Be close with people who think differently than you do. Because if you surround yourself with people who think like you, then there's never a way to test. It's why do they think differently than I do? I want to hear and understand. It'll help me understand why it is that I'm thinking the way that I am. I'm going to end with a story. And then I'll open for questions. It's a story about two of the greatest scholars, two of the greatest Hachamim, rabbis in the Talmud. You might have heard of them. One's name was Rabbi Yochanan. One's name was Rish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish were two very different people. Very different. Rish Lakish used to be, some say that he was a gladiator, some say that he was a head of thieves, but whatever it was, he met up with Rabbi Yochanan, he ended up studying in the Bet Midrash. And whenever Rabbi Yochanan would suggest an idea or an interpretation of something in the Torah, Rish Lakish would argue with him and say, it's not good, or it doesn't hold water, or it's not true because of this, and this reason. And Rabbi Yochanan would be forced to hold his side of the argument or give it up if it didn't hold against the disputes and scrutiny of Rish Lakish. And what happened, without getting too much into detail, Rish Lakish died. And Rabbi Yochanan was broken as a result of Rish Lakish dying. He was completely disheartened as a result of it. He walked around simply saying, where are you, Rish Lakish? So the people in the Bet Midrash were very worried about Rabbi Yochanan. They thought that he would end up losing his mind as a result of losing Rish Lakish. So they decided to get for him the most brilliant prodigy of the school that they knew, and sat him to study with Rabbi Yochanan. And Rabbi Yochanan said, okay, I'll give it a go, I'll try it out. And he sat with him and he would give a suggestion as to how to interpret something, and that student would give Rabbi Yochanan 100 proofs as to why he was correct. And Rabbi Yochanan said, I really don't need you to tell me why I'm correct. Where's Rish Lakish? He used to give me 100 reasons why I was wrong. That's what I need. And ultimately, it's something that we should learn. It's what we need. One has to be brave enough to be able to hear why one might be wrong. And if we care more about truth than security, we'll hear it. And we'll examine our deeds and live the most true and real life that we can. So I'll open for questions if there are any.